A guten Erev Yom Tov. A guten Erev Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah begins tonight. This is the last class of the year, 5782. We'll be together again, God willing, on Wednesday night, right? So no class Monday, Rosh Hashanah, no class Tuesday, Rosh Hashanah. And we're just going to come out of Rosh Hashanah Tuesday night. It'll just be too late, too difficult to do a class. Then Wednesday is actually a fast day. So that's Tzom Gedalia. But we'll do it, right? We'll do it. I'll be right at the end of the fast on Wednesday, but we'll be teaching at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Let's light up the darkness. Do you realize, my friends, that today is AT Daily number 995? So God willing, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday will be episode number 1000. Wow. Can you believe such a number? But we got to get there first. All right. Who is with us on a Sunday? On the afternoon as we await Rosh Hashanah? Bill saying Happy New Year, my dear friends. Yehuda in South Carolina. Yosef in Lowell, Massachusetts. Paula in the Great Northwest. Paula says Shalom. Sharon in New Jersey. Jeffrey in New York City getting ready for the holiday. Renee wishing everyone blessings. Lucy in Minnesota. Gregory in Indiana. Patrice says Happy New Year. Melissa in Great Neck. Steve in Fallon, Nevada. Joanne says Shana Tova. Paul in the UK. Welcome from across the pond. Paul in Minneapolis. Taryn in Lake Tahoe. I love it there. Silvio in Rome. Paula in Chicago. Christo in Texas. Mickey in New Jersey. Sean Litvak. We must be related. Sean says, I need to watch you more. Where are you tuning in from, Sean? Bill says, woohoo. Paula says, wowzers. Meg can't believe it. 1,000. Can you believe it? God willing, we'll make it together on Friday. Sean, welcome from Louisville. Over there on the YouTube side, Aoife in Florida, Lynn in North Texas, Marjorie in Virginia. Lynn says, Kol hakavod. Marjorie, Shana Tova. Everybody should be blessed. May you all be blessed with a new year of health, sweetness, joy, meaning, prosperity, and only good news. And we say amen. Okay, let's get into it. Excuse me. Here we go. I'm a little verklempt. There's so much to do. There's always the last minute preparations. I mean, I'm also the president of our minyan, so getting the seating chart together, getting the pledge cards together, etc. It's always a very big fundraiser for the synagogue. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. It's my job to sell the aliyos. When I grew up going to a conservative synagogue, they didn't do that, right? So they charged dues to be a member of the shul for the year. And then the honors that were given, who gets called to read the Torah on high holidays, was just determined by some executive committee. But in the smaller shuls, in Orthodox shuls, a big custom throughout that Orthodox world is that there's an auction for the aliyos. And some people don't like it, because it's like the wealthier people tend to win those. But it's a big, big fundraiser for the synagogue. And we also create an opportunity for everybody to participate when there's sort of like group is buying a particular honor. But it's very important, because our minyan is not so big, varies from 50 to 80 guys. But we put out a kiddush every Shabbos, and that gets expensive. So this is one of the big fundraisers of the year. And as the auctioneer, so to speak, my job is right before the Torah reading to sort of go through the list of aliyahs, right? We divide the Torah portion that's read on each day of Rosh Hashanah into 6 aliyahs, 5 in a maftir, and a few other honors, opening the Ark of the Torah scrolls, lifting the Torah, wrapping it, etc. And we auction off each of those honors, and it needs to be tracked. So that's just part of the job. I used to do that as the Gabbai. I got promoted from Gabbai to president, so my friend Alan will be the Gabbai, and I'm working with him to make sure all these things gets covered. Which is just to say, there's a lot of last minute work to do. And then also the movie that we are producing is rapidly approaching formal pre-production. Lots to do there. Just giving you a little insight what's going on with me. All right, so where are we holding? We're at the bottom of page 80b here in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. This tractate is about the laws of marriage contracts. We are in chapter 8, which is very much about sort of protecting the property of a wife, the independent property of a wife within a marriage. Now we're starting to look at, what happens if her husband dies childless, so she stands before her yavam, right, her brother-in-law, and until they perform yibum and marry, or chalitza, and go their separate ways, they have an obligation that binds them. And what happens if she inherits property during that time? What happens if she dies during that time? What happens if he dies during that time, the yavam? How is this law of inheritance intersecting with the law of yibum, intersecting with the law of the ketubah? That's what we're talking about. Okay, so we are on Mishna number 5 and opening the Gemara on Mishna number 5. And this is very much with regard to a widow awaiting her yavam who inherits property during that period. What happens to it? Okay, so here's the Gemara. A dilemma was raised before the sages. In the case of a widow awaiting her yavam, her brother-in-law, who dies, she dies, right? So during this period, her husband already died, and now she dies after him. So who buries her? Meaning, who is responsible for the funeral expenses? Must the husband's heirs bury her? Right, so which husband, right? She only had one husband. She hasn't married her brother-in-law, her yavam. She hasn't married him yet. So this is referring to her husband, but he already died, we know that. So who's responsible for her funeral expenses? Is it his heirs, which include the brother who stands before her, as they inherit the marriage contract, or perhaps her father's heirs, right? Because once her husband died, her own property is her own property again, and it would revert to her father's household, right? To her father's family from which it came. So perhaps it's her father's family who are responsible to bear the funeral expenses. So must the husband's heirs bury her as they inherit the marriage contract, or perhaps the father's heirs are obligated to bury her? Why? Because they inherit the property that comes and goes into and out of the marriage with her. So Rav Amram said, come and hear a solution, as it is taught in a baraisa. In the case of a widow waiting for her yavam who dies, now we're on page 81a, her heirs, i.e. the heirs of her marriage contract, are obligated in her burial, right? So it would seem her husband's heirs, because they are also obligated to pay off the marriage contract. Now this indicates that her husband's heirs who inherit her marriage contract must attend to her burial. Abaye said, we too learned in a Mishna, and we'll encounter this on page 95b, a widow is sustained from the property of the orphans, and her earnings are theirs, and they are not obligated in her burial. Rather, her heirs, meaning the heirs of her marriage contract, are obligated in her burial. And who is the widow who has two sets of heirs, necessitating the ruling that only the heirs of her marriage contract are obligated in her burial? You must say that this is a widow awaiting for her yavam, as the yavam inherits her marriage contract. Now Rava said, but let the yavam, let her brother-in-law say, I inherit my brother, and I am therefore entitled to this marriage contract as my brother's heir, while his wife I am not obligated to bury, as I have no connection to her. Right? So the marriage contract is both a set of rights and a set of obligations. Now this guy sounds like he's saying, well, I'll take the rights, but not the obligations, right? So why does he inherit her marriage contract? right? Because the husband had certain rights under her marriage contract, and the yavam is going to stand in his place. So you would think he would say, well, if I inherit the rights of the husband, I will also inherit the obligations. But he would say, well, I inherit because my brother died and I inherit him. I'm not married to this woman. Maybe I will be in the future. I'm not married to her now. So why should I have to bury her? He might say this, right? So Rava says, well, he could say that. Abaye answers Rava and says to him, no. This claim, if the husband made that claim, if the yavam made that claim, the surviving brother-in-law, his claim would not be valid. Why? Because they come upon him from two sides by force of two complementary claims. If he inherits his brother, so he should inherit his brother's obligations as well as his rights, and therefore he should bury the wife. And if he does not bury the wife, as he does not wish to take his brother's place, okay, well then he should give the marriage contract to her, and he won't inherit any of the rights under the marriage contract. So Rava said to him, but I say like this, the yavam, the surviving brother-in-law, claims that I inherit my brother, and his wife I will not bury, as this is not my responsibility. And if the brother should be responsible due to her marriage contract, but a marriage contract cannot be collected during the husband's lifetime, but only after his death. Well, it could be collected if they divorce, right? But if they don't divorce, then the marriage contract can only be collected when the husband dies. Now, the yavam is the first husband's replacement. The husband did die, but we don't pay her marriage contract if the yavam steps in and marries her, right? Because it's not like her first husband died and then she went and married some other guy. If she performs yibum with her yavam, right? If she marries her brother-in-law, it's because the brother-in-law is stepping into the place of his brother who died. Normally, if a woman marries a man, she can never marry his brother, right? He would be prohibited to her. It's only that the Torah makes this exception when a man dies without having children, that his brother can step in and replace the husband. Because he's replacing the husband, she doesn't get paid her marriage contract. It's like the marriage contract just transfers over to the brother who now marries her. She doesn't collect on it because she's still married after they perform yibum. So therefore, if the marriage contract isn't being paid, this guy could argue he doesn't have to bury her. I think that's weird because a husband would be obligated to bury his wife. So, if the brother should be responsible due to a marriage contract, but a marriage contract cannot be collected during the husband's lifetime, only after his death, okay? So the yavam is the first husband's replacement, as he is prepared to perform levirate marriage with the woman, and therefore, she is not entitled to her marriage contract. In other words, that it should be that full amount should be paid out as if her husband died or divorced her, because now the husband has been replaced by his brother. Therefore, he is also not obligated to bury her. I don't like that. But okay, that's the argument that Rav is making. Now, this assumption that a marriage contract may not be claimed during the husband's lifetime is derived from a close reading of the wording of the marriage contract, which states, when you marry another, you may claim this marriage contract, which indicates that if the woman is unable to marry another man because her husband is still alive, she's not entitled to her marriage contract. Indicates that if the woman is unable to marry another man because her husband is still alive, she's not entitled yet to her marriage contract, meaning the payment under the marriage contract. But what I would think that if he's stepping in to sort of undertake the role that her husband had in the marriage contract, and that's why her marriage contract can't be paid out at this point, okay, but her husband would have had to bury her. So let's see what they do. And the Gemara asks, who did you hear who is of the opinion that one expounds the marriage contract and infers laws from its exact language, like expositions from the Torah? Well, this is the opinion of Beis Shammai. And yet we have heard that Beis Shammai say a document that is ready to be collected is considered like it is collected. And here too, it should be considered as though she had already claimed her marriage contract, and he cannot claim to be acting as his brother's heir. And the proof of this is, as we learned in a Mishna in Tractate Sota on page 24a. So Sota is the law of the suspected adulteress. Now, if the husbands of women suspected of being unfaithful died before their wives drank from the bitter waters, in accordance with the laws of the Sota, and it was never established whether they had engaged in relations with another man, so Beis Shammai say they take the marriage contract and do not drink, and Beis Hillel say either they drink or they do not take the marriage contract. Right, so you get that picture. You had a woman who was suspected of committing adultery. Why? Because she secluded herself with a man who is not her husband. Her husband heard about that, and then he said to her, hey, you just acted in a very suspicious manner. You're going to make yourself a suspected adulteress. Do not seclude yourself with a man who is not me, right? Who is not your husband. Again, don't do that. And then she does it again. So at that point, she becomes a sota. And then the husband and wife become prohibited to each other. They cannot have marital relations again. They either divorce, or she has to undergo the trial of the sota, the trial of the suspected adulteress. They go to the temple. They're escorted so that they would not, have marital relations on the way, because it's prohibited now. They get to the temple. A priest, writes out certain words on a piece of paper, dissolves it in the waters, of the bitter waters of the sota. She drinks them, and then, if she survives drinking that water, it proves that she was innocent. She might be suspected, but she never committed adultery. And if drinking the water, with this little bit of ink from the parchment dissolved in it, causes her stomach to, sort of swell and rupture, and she dies, that would be because she did commit adultery. That's the trial of the sota. So what happens if, after the husband has made that warning, and now she's the suspected adulteress, and then he dies, right? So she was in a status of suspicion, and she's supposed to undergo the trial. But she can't undergo the trial because in order to undergo that trial, she has to go there with her husband. So you would think, well, he died. Now the thing is irrelevant. She had a ketubah with the husband, so, her husband died, and so the normal thing when there's a married couple and he dies is you pay her the amount of the marriage contract, but not so fast. She was a suspected adulteress. If she did commit adultery, she is not entitled to any payment under the marriage contract. So in that situation, Beis Shammai say, okay, the guy died. Pay her the marriage contract. She's not going to drink the waters. Beis Hillel say either the woman drinks to prove that she didn't commit adultery, in which case she would receive the payment of the marriage contract, or she does not take the marriage contract. Right? According to Beis Hillel, interesting, she's going to go and perform that ceremony at the temple when the temple is standing, even though the husband has already died. What is the law? How did the law come out? This is one of those cases that illustrates why we don't paskin halacha from the Gemara, right? You would think that generally speaking, the law follows Beis Hillel in disputes over Beis Shammai, but here the law is neither like Beis Hillel nor like Beis Shammai. How did the law come out? In a case of a wife who was warned by her husband not to seclude herself with a certain man, and she did so anyway, if the husband died before she drank from the bitter waters, she does not drink them, and she does not collect her marriage contract. That's where the law came out, but we wouldn't know that from reading this passage. Now we continue. So the Gemara expresses puzzlement at the wording of that Mishna from Tractate Sota. Either they drink or they collect the contract. How can she drink the bitter waters? The merciful one states, then shall the man bring his wife to the priest. And there is no way to fulfill that verse after the husband has died. Rather, Beis Hillel's ruling should be understood differently. It should be like this. Since they do not drink the waters, they cannot take the marriage contract, and that's where the law ended up. Now, that Mishna stated that that Beis Shammai at least say they take the marriage contract and they do not drink. But why do they collect the marriage contract? It is a case of uncertainty. Perhaps she committed adultery. Perhaps she did not commit adultery. If she was unfaithful, she is not entitled to the marriage contract payment. And yet, although her position cannot be verified, Beis Shammai maintain that her uncertain claim comes and supersedes the certain claim of the husband's heirs on the husband's estate. And we pay her the marriage contract. So we must therefore conclude that according to Beis Shammai, a document that is ready to be collected is considered as if it were collected. And therefore, the sum of the marriage contract is already considered to be in the woman's possession, which means that when the heirs do not wish to pay the sum of the marriage contract, they are actually trying to claim money due to an uncertainty, right? Remember that the burden of proof always lies on the one who's trying to take money away from the one who has possession of the money. Who has possession of the money when a marriage contract is to be paid out, right? Normally, like in a case of divorce, obviously the husband is holding the money, and the wife comes and says, okay, we had a marriage contract, now we're divorced, pay me my money. But here in this more odd case, where her husband died, childless, and left a brother who's going to inherit the marriage contract as the heir and possibly as the one who steps in and becomes her husband, and they have this yibum obligation. Is he holding the money? Or once her husband dies, does the money become presumptively hers? And now the yibum brother or other brothers are trying to take the money away from her. And then when she dies, and what question is who pays her marriage expenses, now you see how it's starting to become muddled and it's unclear who's holding the bag, as it were, and therefore who bears the obligations. Now the Gemara questions the earlier statement that the marriage contract may not be collected during the husband's lifetime due to the exposition of the language of the document, right? We're interpreting the language of the ketubah document the way we interpret Torah verses, because we don't have a simple answer from the text. Now, but even if the language of a marriage contract is not expounded, right, and we only go with the simple meaning of its words, still this indicates that she may not claim it during the lifetime of the yavam, right? So we're already talking about a yavam. So the marriage contract, her husband died. You would think, well, now she's entitled to her marriage contract. Her husband died. But because he was childless and he left this yavam, she can't get paid so quick because her brother-in-law might marry her and she might marry him, right? They both agree to marry, then she won't get paid her marriage contract. Rather, she gets a replacement husband in his brother. And the marriage contract now just flows over to be a right and obligation of the new husband, the replacement husband, the brother. And if he should die, okay, then she gets paid the marriage contract. But until then, he eats the produce of her property. He has to sustain her, the whole thing. And even before they actually marry, because he might marry, they don't pay her the marriage contract, right? So that's why it says, but even if the language is, we read the simple meaning, it indicates that she may not claim her marriage contract payment during the lifetime of the yavam, as we require the fulfillment of the clause within the ketubah. When you marry another, you may take that which is written to you. And this is not the case here, as the yavama, the widow, may not marry anyone else before she takes part in chalitza, right, to be released from the yavam. How then can the two claims come upon him, as Abaye suggested? So Rav Ashi said the yavam is also considered like another man. And it is as though she were about to marry another, because he's not her original husband. He might be the brother, there might be a yibum obligation, but he's still not the original husband. Therefore, she is entitled to the marriage contract. Now, the above discussion took place when Abaye and Rava were learning this law together. Sometime later, Rava sent Abaye the following related difficulty by way of Rav Shemaiah bar Zera. And can the marriage contract of a yavama be collected during his lifetime, during the lifetime of the yavam? But isn't it taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Abba says, I asked Sumachos with regard to a Yavam who wants to sell his brother's property, but is unable to do so because all his brother's possessions are mortgaged to the Yavama, right? So let's get that picture. We've already established pretty clearly several times in this tractate that when a man and a woman marry, he has to give her a ketubah, right? He has to create a contract in which if he dies before her or they are divorced, he owes her a sum of money, and the sages established a minimum, right? If she was a virgin when they married, it's a minimum of 200 dinars, but they could offer much more because let's say she comes from a prominent family. So that's the amount that he owes her. His estate owes her if he dies, or he owes her if they divorce. Okay. Where am I? Okay, so now her husband dies. You'd think she gets paid, but he died childless and he left a brother. Okay, so now this Yavam might marry her under yibum, or they might perform chalitza, in which case it's like her husband died, period. But until then, she has this yibum obligation. What if during this period, the Yavam is thinking about whether to marry her or not, but meanwhile, the estate of the brother who died has bills, right? It has bills. He had a life, he had property, and the property had income and it had expenses. Right, and so now these expenses are coming due. So the brother who stands to inherit all this has to deal with it, kind of as the executor of the estate. So if during that period he wants to sell his brother's property, right, maybe because he has bills that he needs to pay. So how can he proceed? He can't just sell it because the original husband's property is mortgaged to pay the wife her marriage payment, her ketubah payment. So if he needs to sell property, what should he do? And so Sumachos replied, so if the brother is a priest, right? The original husband was a priest and his brother is a priest. So if he's a priest who is prohibited from remarrying his divorced wife, so he's not going to be able to make a legal device of divorcing his wife, paying her marriage payment, selling what property he needs to sell, and then marrying her again, because that's permitted when they're not husband and wife, but not permitted while they're husband and wife. They could do that. But if he's a priest, he's not going to be allowed to divorce her and then remarry her. So if he is a priest who is prohibited from remarrying his divorced wife, what should he do? He should prepare a feast for his wife after yibum has been performed, right? His brother's going to marry the widow, and then they're going to make a marriage feast because they're getting married. And during the feast, he should persuade her to allow him to sell the late brother's property. Why does he have to persuade her? Because all of that property is mortgaged to eventually pay the marriage payment of the ketubah. So she has to agree to this. That's one strategy. On the other hand, if he is a regular Israelite who is permitted to remarry his divorced wife, well, then he doesn't have to get a permission. Rather, he just divorces her with a bill of divorce, at which point he is obligated to pay her only the sum of her marriage contract, and the rest of the property is then no longer mortgaged to the marriage contract. Then he can sell what he needs to sell, and then he can remarry her, and he's fixed the problem. Now we're in 81b. And if it enters our mind that a marriage contract can be collected during the lifetime of the Yavam, why is all this necessary? Let him set aside for her part of the property that corresponds to the amount of the marriage contract, and the rest he could sell. And Abaye said, well, according to your reasoning, rather than asking this question based on a baraisa, let him raise this difficulty from the Mishna, which teaches that he may not say to her, your marriage contract is placed on the table for you. Rather, all his property is mortgaged for her marriage contract, right? When they got married, they wrote a marriage contract. Let's just say the regular case, forget yibum for a second. Just a man and woman get married, and they write a marriage contract, and if he dies first or they get a divorce, he owes her, let's say in today's money, $50,000, right? So he owes her $50,000. His estate owes it if he dies, or he owes it if they divorce. A few years go by, right? And he's got a nice estate, right? His property now, or their property, community property is, worth $500,000. Okay, so he says, listen, I don't want to take a chance. I'm going to take your $50,000 that is owed to you under your ketubah. I'm going to set it aside, right? Let's say a separate bank account. There it is. You only get it when I die or we get divorced, but it's set aside. You know it is a sure thing. Now, any other property that I have need not be mortgaged to protect that, and I can just go sell it or do whatever I want with it. Do we allow that? No. Why do we not allow that? Because it might happen that all his property gets lost, some calamity, the country gets invaded, who knows, and he loses everything, including what he set aside, and then what, she's going to be completely out of luck because, she agreed that part was set aside. So rather than that, all of a man's property for the duration of the marriage is mortgaged to her marriage contract. And she has to agree to any, kind of buying and selling of the property that he's going to do during the lifetime. And all the more if he dies, and then this all becomes the responsibility of the yavam. Now, the Gemara answers. The Tana in the Mishna there teaches us good advice, i.e. that one should not do so ab initio, to set aside her amount, and then he can go buy and sell whatever he wants. Meaning that the Tana in the Mishnah was telling us this is the way you should proceed to make sure that she's protected, but it's not actually the law, right? He can set aside what is for her, but it could create problems later. He just shouldn't do it because it can create problems. Or was the Tana in that Mishnah saying, no, it's the law. It's prohibited to set aside what is for her because it might be lost. As if you do not say so, that it is merely good advice, consider the latter clause of the Mishnah, which teaches, and similarly, a man may not say to his wife, your marriage contract is placed on the table. Rather, all his property is mortgaged for her marriage contract. If he wants to sell, here too, may he not sell? Rather, in that case, the Tana teaches us good advice, and therefore here too, with regard to a Yavama, he teaches us good advice. And the Gemara asks, but if so, the question is raised once again as the statement of Rabbi Abba said in the name of Sumachos. That statement is difficult. Why is it necessary for the husband to divorce his wife when he can set aside the sum of her marriage contract? It might not be the optimal way to handle this, but if it's legally permissible, why should he go to all the trouble of divorcing her and marrying her again? Much easier to just set aside what is for her to pay the marriage contract, and then the rest he can buy and sell. Now the Gemara answers, the teaching of Rabbi Abba is also not difficult, as the reason one may not do that is not that he cannot designate a sum as her marriage contract, but rather due to enmity. Listen to this. If the husband or the yavam were to set aside a certain portion for her marriage contract, she would perceive this as a sign that he desires to get rid of her. If he divorces and remarries her, she would realize it is only a ploy to allow him to sell the property and does not indicate his desire to divorce her. Right? So if a wife perceives that her husband is making preparations for what looks like a real divorce, that's going to create, that's going to ruin shalom bayis, right? It's going to upend the peace of the household, and that's why he shouldn't do it. Now the Gemara relates, a certain man, here comes a real life incident. A certain man had a yavam. Right, so he's the yavam, his brother died, left a widow, the brother had no children, now this man has a yibum obligation with his sister-in-law. A certain man had a yavam who happened before him for levirate marriage, for yibum, in the city of Pumbedisa. And his brother wanted to disqualify her from him by means of a bill of divorce. As the law is that if one of the potential yevamim, why are we talking about his brother? We're already talking about a brother, right? There was a man who was married and he died childless, and he left multiple brothers, okay? So one of those brothers is saying, okay, I'll marry her. And a different brother is saying, no, not so fast. Who do you think you are? You're going to step in and marry her. Why would they be having this kind of an argument? You might think more often it's like, well, you should be the one that marries her. Why don't you marry her? But no, they're competing on who's going to marry her, or they're at least suspicious of each other. When would that happen? Well, let's say that the brother who died was the really rich one in the family. So whoever steps in and marries his widow is going to become the primary heir of all that the brother who died left behind. Right, as opposed to when the guy nobody marries the widow, they all split that property equally if they are the brother's heirs. So in this case, one of them was ready to marry the Yavama, and his brother wanted to disqualify her from marrying this one who was ready to marry her. So what did he do? He gave her a bill of divorce. Now, how are we at a bill of divorce? She hasn't even married one of these brothers yet. But when we were in Tractate Yevamos, we saw that if one of the surviving brothers gives this woman a bill of divorce, it's going to complicate the whole situation and create all kinds of problems. And so that's what this other brother did. Right? He tried to disqualify the brother who was ready to step in and marry the Yavama by giving her a bill of divorce. And the law is that if one of the potential Yevamim, one of the potential brothers, gives the Yavama a bill of divorce, she may no longer enter into yibum marriage with the others. This is like an effective strategy. Now, the brother who wished to perform yibum said to this brother who's being a jerk, "What is your opinion?" Meaning, why are you doing this? Is it due to the property? As you are jealous that our brother's property will belong to me in accordance with the law that the brother who performs yibum inherits the late brother's property, whereas the Yavama receives chalitza or a bill of divorce from all the brothers, then all the brothers share the if she receives chalitza or a bill of divorce, then all of the brothers share the property equally. If that's your concern, let me marry her and I will share our brother's property equally with you. Upon hearing this, the brother consented, the jerky brother consented to the menshi brother marrying the Yavama. However, when the menshi brother married the woman, and became her husband, at that point he wasn't so menshi, and he refused to give his brother anything, right? He said he would, but then he didn't. And then this case comes before the court. So Rav Yosef is the one who hears the case, and he says, since the sages have said that one may not sell the property of a widow who is awaiting for her yavam before marrying her, right? He may not sell the property before he marries her. So then in this case, although he has sold it, his sale is not a valid sale. Meaning, when the brother who was ready to step up and marry the Yavama said to his jerky brother who wanted to screw the whole thing up, listen, let me marry her and then I'll split the property with you. That deal, he was not in a position to make. The property wasn't his at that point. He might say, I promise that once I marry her, I will act in this way. But the sages are saying you can't say that. You can't make any promises pertinent to property that is not your property. It's not your property until you marry her. And so too, his promise to give half the property to his brother, which is equivalent to a sale in this case, is of no consequence. As it is taught in a Baraisa, with regard to one who died and left a widow waiting for her yavam, and also left behind property worth the value of 100 maneh, which means 10,000 dinars, although her marriage contract is only worth 1 maneh, meaning 100 dinars, the yavam may not sell any part of his possessions, as all of his property is mortgaged for her marriage contract. And the sages prohibited him from selling it. Therefore, if he did so, the transaction is void. You can see this law of unintended consequences here, right? They didn't realize how one body of law intersects with another and creates a situation that they didn't think. Maybe the brother who was promising to split the late brother's estate after he married the Yavama, when he was promising to split that with his other brother, maybe he didn't know this law. And he really was intending to split it. And then he learned the law and said, you know what? I don't have to split it. Or maybe he knew the law and he was thinking, well, maybe my brother will buy this argument because he doesn't know the law. And he tricked him. We don't know. But in any case, the deal that I will split our late brother's estate after I marry his widow is not a deal. You cannot make that deal and it's not enforceable. So Abaye said to Rav Yosef, whoa. And anywhere that the sages said that one may not sell, is it the law that although he sold, his sale is no sale? Haven't we learned that you're not supposed to sell, but if you do sell, it's a valid sale? That's the difference between ab initio and after the fact. But didn't we learn in a Mishna on page 78a of this tractate? with regard to a betrothed woman selling property. Beis Shammai say she may sell, and Beis Hillel say she may not sell. But they agree that if she did sell, the sale is a valid sale and does not apply in this situation. Evidently, Beis Hillel agree that despite the violation of the sage's injunction, the sale is valid. Abaye therefore rejects Rav Yosef's ruling. Now, they sent this problem before Rabbi Hanina bar Papi, who sent back the following reply. The law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yosef, right? The brother who said he would split the late brother's estate with his other living brother after he marries the Yavama, and then reneged on that deal because he never had a right to make the deal in the first place. That is the law. Rav Yosef ruled it correctly, and Abaye is wrong, according to Rabbi Hanina bar Papi. So Abaye sticks up for himself, and he says, whoa. Is that to say that Rabbi Hanina bar Papi has hung jewelry on it? In other words, his blunt declaration that the law is in accordance with Rav Yosef, but without giving any logical explanation for why the law is in accordance with Rav Yosef, it adds nothing to the discussion, and therefore, his decision should be rejected. If you're going to tell me that the law is like Rav Yosef, tell me why. If all you're saying is the law is like Rav Yosef, period, not good enough, says Abaye. So they sent this case before Rav Minyumi, the son of Rav Nachumi, who sent back the following written reply. The law is in accordance with the opinion of Abaye, but if Rav Yosef will give a reason for his ruling, a different reason than the one he's already given, then send his reasoning to me, and I will reconsider the matter. So Rav Yosef went, and he examined the Mishnayos, the teachings of the Mishna, carefully, and he found a different source for his opinion. As it is taught in a baraisa, if one claimed money from his brother that he had previously lent to him, and the lender died and left behind a widow waiting for her yavam, and the yavam who borrowed money, then the yavam who borrowed money may not say, since I inherit my brother's property by means of the yavama, I may also take possession of the debt, and I do not have to restore it to the other brothers. Rather, one appropriates the sum of the debt from the yavam, and he purchases land with it for the woman's marriage contract, and he eats the produce. And this serves as proof for Rav Yosef's opinion that a yavam may not sell his brother's property or take possession of a debt that he owed his brother, and therefore that deal that the yavam made with his other brother, that they would split the estate after the yavam married the yavama, was not a deal, was not a valid deal, and after he marries her, he doesn't have to honor it and give any property to the brother who did not marry her. Now, so Rav Yosef found a proof that should work, but Abaye will not let it go. Abaye said to him, perhaps they did for him that which is good for him. In other words, the baraisa that states that one should purchase land and eat the produce is merely good advice to prevent the money from being lost. So Rav Yosef says, hey, the Tana teaches one appropriates. Not one is doing good for him, not one is giving good advice, but one appropriates even against his will. And you say that they did for him that which is good for him? The language indicates that this is an obligation, not a matter of advice. So they once again sent this question before Rav Minyumi, the son of Rav Nachumi. And he said to them, so said Rav Yosef bar Minyumi that Rav Nachman said, this baraisa that you're now bringing as a proof is not a Mishna, and it is not authoritative. Consequently, no proof may be adduced from it. So therefore, Rav Yosef has not stated a valid reason for his opinion to set aside the Yavam's pre-marriage agreement with his other brother. And therefore, we rule like Abaye that deal is good, and the brother, who withdrew his bill of divorce so that the Yavam could marry the Yavama, he is entitled to half of the estate per the agreement that they made. Now the Gemara inquires, what is the reason that this baraisa is rejected? Right? Are we saying we're rejecting it because it's a baraisa and it's not a Mishnah? Recall that the difference between a baraisa and a Mishnah is that these are teachings from the same period in the names of the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnaic period, like late Second Temple up to about the year 200 of the Common Era. But not all of their teachings made it into the official Mishnah, compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, known as Rebbe. And some of the teachings, which were contemporaneous and very authoritative, but Rebbe just didn't see fit to include them in the Mishnah, so those are called baraisas. So the Gemara inquires, so what is the reason that this baraisa is rejected? If we say it is because the money he owes is considered movable property, as it is not present, and movable property is not mortgaged to a marriage contract, as only land can be mortgaged for this purpose, well, such an argument does not negate the baraisa. Perhaps it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said that movable property is mortgaged to a marriage contract. Rather, the reason for doubting the reliability of the baraisa is because he says to her, you are not my litigant. There is no legal dispute between the man and the Yavame. He claims that she is not a party to this suit, as he owes money to his brother. Therefore, she cannot claim the money from him by arguing that it is mortgaged for her by the marriage contract. However, this still does not prove conclusively that the baraisa is corrupt, as perhaps it is the opinion of Rabbi Nassan. As it is taught, now we're obviously getting a little bit far afield, and it's getting a little bit tough to follow what's going on here. But remember, what we're basically dealing with is a dispute between two brothers, right? And one got the ruling that he wanted from Rav Yosef, and the other brother got the ruling that he wanted from Abaye. And we're trying to figure out who should we follow, Rav Yosef or Abaye? And they're working through related laws, right? So maybe this baraisa that Rav Yosef is trying to bring to prove his side, perhaps it is the opinion of Rabbi Nassan, as it is taught in a different baraisa that Rabbi Nassan says. From where is it derived? And in the case of one who claims 100 dinars from another person, and the other claims money from a third person, that one appropriates the money from this one, the last bar. In other words, if I owe Tom $100, and Tom owes Alex $100, Alex can come to me and say, give me the 100 that you owe Tom, because Tom owes me 100, so you might as well just skip Tom altogether, and we'll end up the same at the end of the day as if you pay Tom and he pays me. You might as well just pay Alex, right? So we allow that to happen. That's the opinion of Rabbi Nassan. And he gives it to this one. Now, from where do we know that we can do that? The verse states, Numbers 5:7, and he shall give it to him in respect of whom he has been guilty. Now, the words whom he has been guilty, they're expounded to mean that the borrower pays the one who is owed by his creditor, since the borrower is a party to his case, despite the fact that he never incurred direct liability to him. Right? I never even met Alex. I lent money to Tom. I borrowed money from Tom. Tom borrowed from Alex. Now Alex is coming to me. Who are you? But if he can prove that I owe Tom and Tom owes him, it's okay for me to just pay Alex directly. So if that's the case, so therefore it is possible to explain the baraisa that was cited by Rav Yosef based on this same reasoning. Rather, a different justification exists for rejecting the baraisa that Rav Yosef brings to prove his point. Now we're on page 82a. We're just going a little bit forward so we can end this discussion, and then I'll go to questions and comments. So rather, a different justification exists for rejecting the baraisa. We have not found a Tana who is stringent with these two stringencies with regard to a marriage contract. Rather, one rules, either in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, that movable property is mortgaged for a marriage contract, or in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nassan. No one expects both of these stringencies, and yet this baraisa can be explained only by a combination of the two opinions. It must therefore be rejected as non-authoritative, and therefore Rav Yosef has failed to bring support for his opinion, and it must be that Abaye is going to win the day, and the brother, who got his brother, the Yavam, to agree to split the late brother's estate after he marries the Yavama, this brother's going to win, and he's going to get half that estate. Now, Rava said, if so, that is the meaning of that which I heard from Abaye, who said, this is not a Mishna, and I did not know what it is. Rava initially did not understand why the teaching should be dismissed, but he subsequently realizes what Abaye was saying. That's where we're going to knock off. I'll answer a few comments and questions, but reminder, Happy Rosh Hashanah, Shana Tova. May you be inscribed for a year of health, goodness, prosperity, and good news, all good things. And then we will resume our class on Wednesday. Wednesday at the regular Wednesday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. It'll be at the end of a fast day, the fast of Gedalia, which is always the day after Rosh Hashanah. So it'll be tough, but we will manage it, and we'll teach a triple daf that day, making up the pages of Monday, Tuesday that we missed. We'll do the 3 pages on Wednesday. All right, let me see any comments or questions. Nina is going nuts getting ready for the holiday, so I'm just scanning the comments for any questions that you might have. And I'm not seeing questions, just a bunch of beautiful blessings and good wishes for each other. I love it. Okay. And Bill says, this all sounds like a case study in why you ought not court shop. Just so, right? And that's a very good general teaching that Bill is mentioning. And this is why we teach in Pirkei Avos, right? The sages taught that you should have a Rav, right? Not just a rabbi, but a Rav, meaning you should have one rabbi in your life that you ask your halakhic questions of, and then you have to accept his answer. You can't get an answer from him and I don't like that answer. Let me find a different rabbi who'll give me a different answer. Why did Abaye get mixed up in Rav Yosef's rulings? That's a good question because Abaye was Rav Yosef's student, right? So why was Abaye, challenging a ruling of Rav Yosef? There must have been a lot going on, the political situation, who were these brothers? I don't know, right? So it's a little bit of an unusual case. But in the end, it seems that Rav Yosef got it wrong and Abaye got it right. Now we know that Rav Yosef was the one that later in his life forgot his learning, and it might have been as that was beginning to happen, and Abaye had to step in because Rav Yosef was making a mistake. Could be like that, right? Could be like that. Okay, my friends, may this coming year, 5783, be the best ever. Just like Paula is saying there in the comments, may it be the best ever for you and yours. Sending you all our love. Shana Tova, Gemar Hasima Tova. May you be inscribed for a good decree in the coming year.